Hey guys, welcome back to Critical African Thinkers. As you know, this is the place where we examine everything under the microscope of logic to ascertain what is most factual and logically consistent. So today I'm going to be covering an interaction that Joe Rogan had with a Zionist um, defender of Israel, someone who is out there just making excuses for the genocide that and the catastrophe that Israel is currently carrying out. I mean, they have this where they just look for different celebrities, they look for different influencers to push the Israeli narrative to try to whitewash what Israel is doing. Now, something with Joe Rogan, we know that he can easily be bamboozled by nonsense, by rubbish. But in the very rare moments where he is not bamboozled by nonsense, by rubbish, he is quite effective in holding people's feet to the fire. And that's exactly what he did with this Zionist defender of Israel who was trying to whitewash an obvious ethnic cleansing and genocide that's currently going on in Gaza. So we're going to go through this interaction and see the solid points that Joe Rogan made and how this guy tried to weasel out of it, but he was unsuccessful in doing that because there is no defense for genocide. However, you want to put it out, whatever justification you want to give for what Israel is doing right now, it doesn't pass the smell test. Going this far, going this long, it doesn't pass the smell test. So let's get right into it.
The only way to do it is to bomb the places where the civilians are because the bad people are there as well. And I know what you're saying about the condemnation of Israel, and I agree to a certain extent. But could you imagine? I mean, we're essentially in some sort of strange conflict with drug cartels in Mexico. Now, imagine if that didn't exist 20 years ago. I never heard about it, but now we hear about it every day. What if 20 years from now it becomes even more intense? And what if some drug cartels in a gang sneak across the border and kill a bunch of Americans just because they hate America? If we bombed Mexico into the Stone Age, do you know how upset people would be? If we bombed factories because the cartels had embedded themselves in the factories and we killed tens of thousands of innocent workers who were just poor people, do you know how upset people would be? They'd be very upset. It just hasn't happened before. So this unique condemnation is because we're seeing it. We're seeing the consequences of this. And when people look at what's happening to Gaza, like, how does that come back?
Yeah.
There's nothing left. This is getting obliterated. And what does that mean? What is
So essentially, the scenario that Joe is painting is in response to the allegation by this guy that Israel is being unnecessarily scrutinized. And he's saying, you know what? The reason Israel is being scrutinized is because he's doing something extraordinary, something that people haven't seen perhaps since the Nazis. That's why this is happening. Nothing, according to the Israeli view, justified what happened on October 7th. And I can agree with that. Despite the legitimacy of the Palestinian cause, I don't think anything justifies attacking civilians, right? Killing civilians. Even though it's debatable the extent to which Hamas did all those atrocities compared to what Israel itself, the Israeli army did. But let's say, for the sake of argument, that Hamas actually killed the 1,200 people in Israel, and many of them civilians. Nothing justifies that. All the things that Israel has done, the occupation, the ethnic cleansing, doesn't justify the attack on civilians. But on the other hand, Israel wants you to accept that premise that nothing justifies October 7th, but October 7th justifies everything, including killing every Palestinian in Gaza. That the death of 1,200 Israelis justified killing 2 million Palestinians. So at what point do you say enough is enough? At what point do you say, you know what? Yeah, what they did was terrible, but it doesn't justify what is going on right now. People of conscience, even Israelis of conscience, are beginning to speak out, including former Israeli prime ministers who are saying what Netanyahu is doing, what Israel is doing under Netanyahu, is obviously a war crime, ethnic cleansing, it's genocide. So when is it going to stop? So this scenario that Joe painted for this Zionist, right? And let's just see how he tries to weasel his way out of it.
does that mean for the future? What does it mean to the people that live there? What is being done to help them? Is it a death sentence to tens of thousands of people or a million people? Like, what is going to happen in 2, 3, 4 years? What if this keeps going on and on?
But sometimes a moral judgment has to be made. And I think in relation to...
Right off the bat, this guy just makes my skin crawl People like this, they just exude evil, even though they try to be as calm, zen like. They try to be, and it's invoking morality. What? This is the thing that really gets me about the Israelis. They always want to invoke moral language, they want to invoke religious sentiment. Oh, morality. Oh, you're killing kids, for crying out loud. You're starving children, women, civilians, and you're invoking morality. There's justification for this. I mean, was there justification for anything that the Nazis did? Or you want to tell me that of all the complaints that the Nazis complained about Jewish people, that there wasn't maybe one or two Jewish person who was guilty of that thing that, got extrapolated to all Jewish people? But that did that justify the atrocities that the Nazis did? So what are you talking about? What's the morality? What's the justification for this? There is no justification.
To the Israel-Hamas war, the way I
This is not a war. A war is between two parties that are essentially maybe on equal footing. Iran and Israel going at each other. That was a war. These are people who are under siege. This is an apartheid system. These are people who are trying to break away from prison. They haven't committed any crime, but they've been placed in jail. So this is not a war.
is that this was an assault on ordinary civilians by a barbaric army, and I don't accept.
I agree. An assault on ordinary civilians by a barbaric army, and that barbaric army is Israel's, the IDF, assaulting ordinary civilians in Gaza. I absolutely agree.
The idea that they are purposely targeting civilians or that they kill those aid workers on purpose. I just don't think that's true.
So
And if
Oh my God. It doesn't matter what you think. Of course, you're going to not think that's true, but the evidence contradicts what you are thinking. Because if you look at those aid workers that were killed, they were clearly marked as aid workers. The vehicle they were traveling in, and they were dressed in such a way as to recognize that these people were UN aid workers. They were killed anyway. Or was it the Israelis who escaped from Hamas's captivity, naked, waving a white cloth, um, white cloth who were killed? Or is it people going to get aid who were killed? Or journalists being bombed in a hospital, and when people tried to rush to help them, the hospital being bombed again? So the fact that even Israel's internal findings has shown that 84% of the people they've killed so far are civilians, it just shows that they are doing this deliberately. It's not even possible. The number of civilians dead in the Russian Ukraine crisis, as big as that conflict is around 2 to 3% of all the people killed. Just about 2 to 3% are civilians, and you have a situation where 84% means for every 100 people killed, 84 of them are non-combatants, innocent civilians. And you're saying you don't believe that they are deliberately targeting civilians. Then what the hell are they doing? At what point do you say, yes, what they're doing is deliberately targeting civilians? Is when it's 100%, when everybody in Gaza is dead. These people are evil.
but so what Israel is doing, there is collateral damage
Oh my
to
God.
Israel's just pursuit of Hamas.
You see the language is using. Just. What is just about this? What exactly does the word just have to do in this conversation? What is just about starving children? What is just about shooting people who are going to get aid? What is just about bombing every building in a narrow strip of land?
the idea that killing innocents in order to get to the bad people is morally superior. You kind of have to make the judgment that you care about them less than you care about your people. Because if you could imagine a scenario where a Jewish hospital had Hamas in its basement, and they made the decision to bomb the Jewish hospital and kill all the Jews inside of it just to get to the 40 or 50 Hamas guys that are there, no one would say that that's okay. So if you're saying that these people who have no say in how their culture is run are less valuable in terms of like what you care about, what happens to these people that had nothing to do with it. We care about the people in Israel. They had nothing. They got parachuted in, killed, and at a rave. It's horrifying. But it's also horrifying for the people that have zero say in how their society is run. They're young and they're women and children, and they're getting bombed into oblivion because where they are is where Hamas is. If those were Jews,
whose fault is
but
that?
it's definitely Hamas's fault.
Yeah.
But the problem is deciding whose fault doesn't make it feel better for the people that feel it's a moral outrage that you're destroying tens of thousands of innocent lives. And who knows how many people are wounded permanently, and who knows how many people are displaced. Their life will never be the same again. And it's all happening because the moral decision is that in order to get rid of these bad people, you're willing to kill these innocent people that are not us.
But the truth of the matter
But isn't that true? Because if they were Jews, if there was 500 Jews and 3 Hamas guys, who would be cool with killing all those innocent Jews to get to the Hamas people?
So these people don't see the Palestinians as human beings, so they are perfectly willing and able to justify such atrocities against them. Of course, he's going to try to... God, it's so exhausting at this point in time. The level of evil that you see being displayed by the Israeli society, by someone who would come out to justify obvious evil for whatever reason, for whatever reason. There is no justification for what is going on right now. But a human being who sit down and look at the suffering of other human beings and says, yeah, there's a reason why this is happening, and we should do nothing to stop it.
But what you're saying is technically correct. But I can think of no war in history.
Human lives become a technicality. What you're saying is technically correct.
It is important to talk about the history of conflict.
Yes.
I can think of no war in history where there haven't been civilian casualties in pursuit either of an unjust cause.
There is no war in history where the civilian casualty, no war where the civilian casualty has been this high. 84%. I don't think even the Japanese, as horrible as they were in the rape of China, I don't think they were this brutal. I don't think they had an 84% civilian casualty. I don't think the Nazis had an 84% civilian casualty. So trying to make it seem as if this is the nature of war, especially in the 21st century, it makes no sense.
Like the pursuit of Saddam Hussein, apparently because he was responsible for 9/11. Bullshit, built on lies, built on a tissue of misinformation, and hundreds of thousands of people died and suffered as a consequence of that. So wars are either fought for unjust purposes and civilians die as a consequence.
But that's kind of a straw man, because there is that, but then there's also the vast majority of people who look at it as a horrific loss of life of innocent people. And just to chalk it off to the horrors of war, it's like that's the only way to do it.
Notice how he did not answer the scenario of what if you had 5 Hamas fighters and 500 Jews in a building, and to get to those Hamas fighters, you have to kill those 500 Jews. You see how he never answered that question. He just pivoted to something else. He just pivoted to say this is the nature of war. So in the nature of war, would it be acceptable to kill 500 Jews to get to 5 Hamas fighters? Would it be acceptable? He never answered that question. This guy is evil.
The only way to do it, to bomb civilians because Hamas embeds itself in civilians? I don't know. I'm not an expert on war tactics.
But I don't think it's the only way to do it. You're right to say that if one were just to throw one's hands in the air and say, it's war, what do you expect? That's not.
But that's exactly what you're doing.
A good response.
Right.
That's not a good justification for what's happening. But what I'm saying is that beyond what I'm saying is, I think, twofold. The horrors of war attend every war. That's a given. Every war is horrible and sick-making and hellish. That's a given, I think. But then there's another issue, which is the question of why a war is being fought? Is it being fought for criminal reasons and wrong reasons? And I think there are many examples of that, spearheaded both by your country and mine over the past 100 years. Unjust
Yes, it is being fought for the wrong reasons.
wars that led to unjust deaths. Are there also wars that are just and that are worth fighting? Yes. The thing
And this is not one of those.
is that war is awful, but John Stuart Mill, a great liberal thinker from the 1800s, he made the point that war is an ugly thing, but it's not the ugliest thing.
Yeah, the ugliest thing is being a genocidal cunt. That's the ugliest thing.
Lack of patriotic feeling or the lack of a belief that anything is worth a war is worse. And I do think we're seeing that in the West now, this revulsion at war. We are in a very luxurious position in the West, especially younger generations. They've never had to fight for anything. They've never faced an existential threat from a neighboring army that wants to destroy both your state and your religion and your people. They've never faced that level of threat. And what's more, from an army that hides in ordinary streets, in crowded communities, amongst ordinary people. So there's this kind of luxurious moralism, I find, in some of the condemnation of Israel, coming from young people in Europe who've never had to fight for anything, never had to fight to maintain their existence, never had to fight against an existential threat to their entire way of life.
I can imagine the Nazis making this exact same argument against Jews as justification for why they had to massacre them. Maybe Kanye was right. Hurt people hurt people. I mean, imagine people who had gone through such horrors in their history meting out something similar to what they'd gone through. It's insane.
What's more, these young people in Europe, their great-grandfathers shoved Jews into ovens. And then they have the absolute gall to say to Israel and the Jewish state, well, why do you need your own country?
Yeah, so now the Jews... Okay. Their great-grandfathers did that to European Jews, killed European Jews. And you think that the solution to that problem is not to solve the racism that led to that massacre, is to say that the people who carried out that massacre are essentially right. Jews don't belong to Europe. They have to have their own country. Because that's exactly the argument that the Nazis and the anti-Semites were making. Their argument before they went to the final solution was that Jews don't belong to Europe, that they were a foreign element. So they have to have they have to be separate. This is essentially what you're saying. You're saying you agree with them. Let's not solve anti-Semitism. Let's not solve racism. Let's just segregate ourselves into ethno-states. That way everyone is happy. That way everyone is fine. Everyone is okay. These are the sorts of insane logic and argument that makes people unwitting Hamas supporters, unwitting Nazi supporters, because the arguments they're making makes no sense. They're making arguments in favor of ethnic cleansing, in favor of segregation, in favor of all the terrible things that you could think of that the Nazis did. That's what this guy is making an argument in favor of. But I must commend Joe Rogan, who was able to actually come back really, really in a very substantial and substantive way against this obviously evil guy who is trying to present himself as a very rational actor, as a very calm person, having a Zen-like state. Would he be this calm if he had family members in Gaza who are starving to death, who have been shot, or in the West Bank whose lands are being stolen on a daily basis? Would he be this calm? The answer is no. You know what? If you don't condemn evil, then you're complicit in it. You are a part of it. And all those who have given cover to Israel, they are guilty of this genocide. They are guilty of the blood of the Palestinians, of other fellow human beings that are being shared at the moment. And of course, someday justice will prevail. Anyway, that's the show for today. Like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you in another live stream. It's bye for now.